Welcome to Unmasking Abuse. We're so excited that you are choosing to spend this time with us. I've got some amazing people with me today, and, we want to continue to invite you to join us over the next 2 months as we have additional people on to talk about a very prevalent topic that we are all very passionate about, which is unmasking abuse, so that we can all work together in the silence to literally break the violence. That's our goal. So today I have two people with me that I want to introduce to you. One is Dr. Diane Thibodeaux. She is absolutely the most phenomenal person, or one of two phenomenal people in my life. And I get the pleasure of calling her mom.
Yes.
So I'm thrilled about that. She has an extensive background. We'll talk a little bit about her today. And then second, we actually have Pethuel LeFlore, who is the director of Oasis of Love Crisis Intervention Center. And today she's going to share her story. It's a very powerful story. I have heard it before, but this will be her first time telling it in its entirety. And so what I'm asking you to do is join in with us, stop and think. We've got participants in the audience today as well. And so we're all going to be engaging in this topic today as we listen to her powerful story. And prayerfully, you'll pick up some tips that will help you be more proficient, that will help you to amplify your voice and elevate our message of ending domestic violence. So before we get started, I would like for Dr. Diane to talk a little bit, because she is actually the founder of Agape Oasis. She's the founder of Family Life Center, and God put something on her heart 35 years ago.
Yes, he did.
That brings us to where we are today. So you want to talk a little bit about it?
35 years ago, the Lord led me to address the issue of domestic violence in the faith-based community. Now, I was told that because we're Christians, there was no domestic violence in the church.
Wow.
But then I began to meet with community advocates, and they began to tell me the story of so many women that are trying to get help, but the churches wouldn't let them. So I became a conduit between the church and the services that are available to them. And from then to today, unfortunately, it is still a problem with domestic violence in the church and in the faith-based community. We didn't limit it to the community, to the church, but the church was a place where it was a hidden cry. Mm-hmm. Women were seeking help, but could find none. So I developed a tool that I could give to pastors, that pastors would have an opportunity to share with their community and with their church.
That's interesting. We're talking about this book, so if you don't have it, you can purchase it.
Exactly.
But this book also has a workbook with it,
It is a workbook.
In addition to reading, which is excellent. I think the more tools we can get in people's hands to help.
Exactly.
Because it not only equips the person that's being impacted, it also equips a friend, a sister,
you can do it
family.
in a group. You can do it individually.
Right.
You can begin to address the issue and provide answers to mama, sister, brother, cousin, neighbor. When you sit down and have a cup of coffee and you know they're having issues, and we all have been impacted some way by domestic violence and violence of some sort. This is a tool that you can use to give them some help, give them some guidance, and give them some direction.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought that up, because I remember, when I came into the family, we would often talk about domestic abuse is not one of those things that you raise your hand and come to the altar to say, I'm being impacted by it, or I'm actually abusing my wife or my child.
No.
And so when you think about, being able to identify it
exactly
as a leader, whether you're in a church, whether you're in a community, whether you're in an organization, whether you're in your family, I think it was so important that you continue to equip leaders with it. But I think the funny story is people actually thought your husband was abusing you, right?
They did. When I first addressed the issue with my husband, the late Dr. Rufus Thibodeaux, he said, honey, you can't write this because people are going to think I beat you up or I abuse you. I said, well, honey, the Lord gave me this to do. I said, give me 1 year. And if there's no abuse and if there's a big issue with it, I'll just stop. The first year, just through word of mouth, one volunteer, we served over 200 women and men around this issue. So my husband said, well, maybe there is a problem.
Yeah. That's good. He's like, maybe you're on to something.
Maybe on to something. He said, I wasn't sure about it because, you know, he was a pastor.
Yeah.
And as a pastor, he didn't want it to seem like his church was having a problem, you know, or that people weren't Christians and they weren't serious about their salvation. But that has nothing to do with it. These are issues that some people, it's a learned behavior that they've grown to. And if it's never interrupted with some type of intervention, it's going to continue. Whether you're a pastor, a deacon, or the good brother in the front of the seat, or the praise team leader, it doesn't matter. It impacts us all.
And I think our job is to really help people identify that it's happening, talk about it, right? And then get the tools that are needed to stop the behavior at the end of the day. So here we are 35 years later.
35 years later.
And Pethuel is actually the director of Oasis of Love Crisis Intervention Center, you know, which is an arm of our church as well, where we can provide services to not only women, but also men and children who have been impacted by it. I think our services have expanded. We're in schools, we're working with organizations, we're working with housing, so many ways that we can, working with shelters as well. And so excited for us to have this conversation together. But I think one of the most beautiful things is that not only are you the director, but you're actually an overcomer.
I am.
You're an overcomer. And so we want to give you some time to tell your story.
Sure. And while I smile, right, I smile because I am an overcomer. I am a victim, survivor, and a thriver. And so I smile as we talk about this because even as you mentioned, Apostle Diane, Dr. Diane, that in the church is where you brought it forth. And in the church is where I was experiencing my domestic violence with my then husband, who was the praise team leader.
Isn't that something?
Right? And we were neighbor to our pastor. So we lived right next door to our pastor. Sundays were really trying, actually, to get up and go to church because abuse may have happened either the night before or the morning of. And so what do? I'm happy that we've called this series Unmasking. We put on a mask.
Yes.
We clear our face, we stop the crying, we dust it off, and we show up.
Exactly.
And so that happened for many years. And then when I was pregnant with my now 18-year-old, I suffered the last of my domestic violence and said that it was no more.
Now, mind you, you have 3 children in total.
Correct.
You actually have 5 children because you have 2 that you have adopted, right?
Correct.
She's a resilient woman here, okay? But you birthed 3, which means your oldest son was with you while all of this was happening, and your 18-year-old now was
in the womb.
In the womb, right?
So yes, at 4, well, from age birth to 4, my son, who is now 24 years old, witnessed abuse almost daily. And it got so bad to where he never wanted to go home at night. So we would stay away from home during the day, especially if he was home. And we would go to friends' houses, and it was masked completely. My girlfriends didn't know. Their families didn't know until I had to release my hidden cry for help.
Right.
See.
I had to call one of my friend's fathers, who was a big part of our friend community. And he came to our home, and he couldn't believe what he saw. And that was the beginning of me sharing my voice of abuse, but it was not when I decided to leave. And that was the unfortunate part. I didn't leave for multiple reasons, but I would say it took me maybe 7 or 8 times to leave. I moved to Minnesota actually when I was pregnant with my first child because of abuse. And he came to Minnesota, and we went back when my son was born. He was 2 months old, and I went back, and the abuse continued. We tried many ways of counseling and working things through because we too were Christians.
Right.
And what I learned was I had an abusive past, not of my own, but from my mother.
Mm-hmm.
And as I've been going through this journey, I didn't witness it with my own eyes, but I heard it,
Mm-hmm.
and I was privy to it because I was in the home.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so relationships that were not healthy, period.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Not friendships, not boyfriend relationships, and definitely not my first marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And so it took my son. One day, the abuse had gotten pretty bad. I remember a drawer of forks, knives, and spoons. You know, everyone has that kitchen drawer.
Right. Right.
And he threw the drawer. He took the drawer out, threw the drawer at me, and threw it. And all I remember seeing were knives hitting the wall, the forks hitting the wall, because he had thrown it so hard that they stuck. My son and I were in distance of that. We called the police. He had thrown a pop can that had hit my son at that time.
Wow.
And I called the police for the first time. And the police came. They removed him from the home. And the abuse got worse because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
He was gone from the home. He was jailed for 2 nights, but they released him to come back home. I didn't know of an order for protection at that time.
Right.
I didn't know of any services at that time. I didn't even know that I was an abused woman at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because I could get up every day, fix myself up, go to work,
Yes.
leave my home as though everything was perfect. It looked picture perfect.
Right.
We live in the suburbs. We have a home. We have 2 cars. We are neighbors to our pastor. We're in community. So why would I think that I was abused? Why would anyone around me think that I was abused? But it happened more and more often. Sunday mornings were very hard. I would go to church in the morning. Some days I wouldn't even have my ring on because he'd take it. And in fact, he'd wear it sitting in the pulpit, praise and worship. And he'd sometimes just, just a reminder. There were very subtle reminders. And when I decided to leave, it was because the abuse had gotten so horrific. My family were used to me showing up for everything. Financially, we were fine. As a family, we showed up. But when the abuse started to get worse, I was more isolated. I didn't show up for Christmas time. I wouldn't show up for Thanksgiving. I was one of the cooks of the family. So when my household isn't open for an event or for company, there are red flags. But I'm still masking the abuse.
Exactly.
And so then I began showing up by myself. Or when the marks began to show up, I had to find excuses, lies. I became a great liar. Once I showed up with a black eye. I was picking up my son from one of my friends' homes. And I told them that the ironing board, what is it called? Spray starch. That my abuser at the time, that he threw the spray starch can at me too fast. I was ironing, right? This is the story. I'm ironing, he threw the spray can bottle at me, and I didn't look fast enough and it hit me. Okay, that is a very far-fetched lie, but I told it. Fast forward 20 years, I sent a text to my girlfriends just this month asking if they had pictures or recounts of challenges that I faced during that abusive period. And one of my girlfriends, who was a retired cop, she said, I was so upset with you because we didn't know that you were being abused. Not until I became a police officer did I see all the loopholes, gaps, and lies that you shared with us. And I felt very hurt because I had no position to help you.
Now, how long had you been in the relationship?
From age 18 to age 26.
Okay.
Okay.
So I was in an abusive marriage for 8 years.
For 8 years. What was the breaking point for you? Because you've shared that you tried to leave, right? You left at one point, and
Left
then you
multiple
said,
times.
all right, I'm going to come back. I'm sure there was, like you said, there was counseling, but what was the breaking point that made you decide, like, this is it and this is enough?
Sure. So I am 8.5 months pregnant with my daughter. My sister and brother called me. Typically, I would come back and forth to Minnesota from Chicago to visit. And they told me I sounded low. As they were talking to me, my sister said, well, come on, it's your niece's birthday. You always come. It is a year ago, October 16th. This was the time of the year that it was, October 16th. And she says, come on, you always come. What's the problem? Just tell Anthony to send you the money. To give you the money. I was like, no, guys, this time I won't be coming. And I said, what's wrong with you? It's like nothing. And so I knew how bad it had gotten, but my siblings didn't know at all. And so my sister said, excuse me, what the hell is he doing to you? This doesn't sound normal. My brother said, Pethuel, talk to me. Is he crazy over there? I didn't realize he was on the phone. He heard it, the phone clicked, and I said, guys, not right now. I got off the phone with them, and he was coming up the stairs from down the stairs with the phone, and he punched me square in my face. I left that day, but I did come back, and I sat down with him. I told him I would leave our son with him. I packed up my things, and I just said, I can't do this. I had threatened suicide October 10th, just 6 days prior. And I said, I'm going to leave Jalen with you, and I am going to go to my sister and figure my life out. He had agreed. We packed everything up. He went somewhere, and I went somewhere. By the time I came back home, he had bolted our house door, the screen door and the main door, with shoestrings. So the bolt, the bolts that hold the door in place, he connected that to the door so I couldn't open the screen or the door. I'm 8.5 months pregnant. I break into my own house through the garage. I climb through a window in my garage to get inside the home. Everything that we had agreed and packed up, he had moved, removed, and hidden somewhere. My girlfriend and I are in the house trying to gather a few things to leave. He comes home. When he sees us, he is irate, and he goes to town on both of us. He kicks me through my son's car bed, so I'm down flat, and he goes to punch me. When I came to Minnesota after this, I had a bloody nose and a fat lip. I'm 8.5 months pregnant. My girlfriend is screaming because she had never witnessed it. And she's like, I can't believe this is happening. She jumps on him, he spins her, he throws her in the closet, and he's fighting my friend. So finally, I just got us together, and we ran out of there, and I moved to Minnesota the very next day, and I never turned around. I did not leave my son, but he had taken all of the money out of our accounts. So I moved to Minnesota with $12 in my pocket, my pregnant belly, my 4-year-old, and a pillow. And I thank God for that very humbling moment, because that was the day I determined that my life would change forever. And I never looked back.
What did your family say after they found out the horrific things that was happening to you right under their nose, or the pastor?
So I have multiple uncles, okay? I have a family of men. And even throughout the years being here, I get calls, like irate calls. I can't believe you didn't tell us. Well, my uncles showed up. And thankfully, when they showed up, the police showed up as well. And I just shared this with one of my uncles that I connected back with recently. He asked me why. And I said, our families were too close. We grew up together.
Right. Yeah.
We grew up as next door neighbors. Our families were family. Our brothers were best friends. He had been my brother's best friend. And I knew, had I shared any of the information, my uncles, one, weren't having it. My brother was a cop, wasn't having it. Something terrible could have happened to my abuser, and I would have looked at it as my fault.
Your fault. Right. Right.
And I was young. I was immature at the time. I was impressionable at the time. And he was the chief breadwinner. It looked great on paper. But I'm thankful that I left.
And that's often common, right? The abuser is typically the one that holds the purse string.
Yes.
Exactly.
And so, one, I know this is just 3 of several things that have happened. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Absolutely.
I mean, because those are so, abuse is one of those things that if you don't experience it or you don't know someone that has experienced it, it sounds like a movie almost. But this is real life. But we look at you now and your resiliency, right? And how amazing you are and how you're helping so many men, women, and children from what you have actually gone through and helping to revamp systems and, fighting for policies that will help to break the silence and provide tools for people to live a more brilliant life as well.
Yes.
We want to hear a little bit about your story once you got here. Just quickly, like what happened? What were some of the resources that you used, whether you named the place or not, but what did life look like once you made that courageous decision to finally leave? What happened when you got here?
So I'll tell you this, guys, and for any victim survivor out there, this is not an easy journey.
It's possible, but not easy.
It's not, it's not easy, but all things are possible.
Right.
All things.
And if you take the first step,
That's right.
I guarantee there will be a person right there to take the next step with you.
Yes, that's true.
When I moved to Minnesota, my sister and brother lived here, but we also didn't live our lives the same.
Okay.
And I realized that. And I also didn't want to disrupt other people's households, right?
It's a lot to think about, right? You're
It
thinking
is.
about what am I going to do, but you're also thinking about the people that you're here with, and
You
very
are.
thoughtful of you to say, I don't want to disrupt their lives either.
And I also knew that eventually he would come looking for me. That always was the case, and he did. But I called a day one shelter, and on the other end was Women's Advocate. And I went in when I got here. We did a soft intake. Actually, they never even got to finish my intake, and they put me into their shelter. My son called it a school. And I remember the very next day, well, let me go back. My prayer, that night that I had gotten a room, my prayer, I had a garbage bag. Remember I told you I came with a pillow, but I had gathered like a blanket or something. And so I had it was a garbage bag and a hamper. And I remember praying, I opened the garbage bag and I just said, God, this cannot be my life. Please send the help I need and the people that I need along the way and never stop. That was my prayer 20 years ago. And it has not changed, and he has not stopped, and the people continue, and the places continue. But I got there after that prayer the next morning. I was downstairs, and I remember I walked past someone's office. They were on their hands and knees, and not abruptly, but they touched my foot. The person that was in the office on their hands and knees, she touched my foot, and to stop me from walking. And I looked down, and she said, "Are you Pethuel?" No one gets my name right.
Right.
And I said, "I am." And I didn't think anyone knew my name because I hadn't been there 24 hours. And she said, "I want to meet with you." In one day, less than 24 hours, she said, "We're going to find you transitional housing."
Wow. Yeah.
I had a place to live in a week. It was different for me. It was just a new world. You know, going from living in a home to a shelter.
Yes.
Going from being with all of your family to no family.
Yes.
So it became purposeful isolation for intentional transformation. And I am grateful because after that, there were so many organizations, thankful to Oasis of Love, thankful to East Metro Women's Council, and thankful to all the people, the churches, the community that opened their arms to me and my children, you know, because the fear factor, it became smaller than the survival factor,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
The fear of what to do next became such the small voice in my head versus the roaring lion that said, you have to survive this thing.
Yeah, that's good.
You have to live. You have to move. You have children.
Exactly.
What do you want their lives to be?
And you start gaining some of your strength back.
I
And
did.
your power back.
I at night would dance. I would dance unto the Lord.
That's so good. So powerful.
Every night. It became my will to give it all to God. Because at night, those were the terrorizing times.
Right, right. The memories.
The memories.
The isolation.
The hurt, the pain, the loneliness.
Right,
Yes.
right.
The coping. When you have a newborn child and you don't have anyone around, you have to then pour all of yourself into yourself and into your children. And you have to find that place that goes beyond your hurt to say, I can do this.
That's right.
I'm a winner.
Exactly.
I'm an overcomer. What does the word tell me? I'm more than a conqueror.
That's right.
My children will live and not die. I will be successful. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me.
Yes.
And I had to stand on, hold on to. And the scripture that moved me here, thank you, Father, Jeremiah 29. Thank you, Jesus. I know the plans and the thoughts that I think towards you, says the Lord.
Yeah.
Thoughts of good and not of evil, thoughts to give you a hope and a good future. Plans not to hurt you.
That's right.
And that is the scripture that I ran with, and I will never put it down to this day because God has never failed me, and that was my platform for my healing, beginning, middle, and end.
And even now, you know,
Even
as we're
now.
wrapping up, you know,
Yes.
I do want to, I just want to give you an opportunity to really share a message of hope for someone.
Sure.
Someone that may be currently going through it, right? Someone who's saying, I can't speak up, I can't leave. You know, what would be your message of hope to someone?
To that person, male or female, or children, my message to you today is you are worth it. You deserve so much better, and you have help. If you don't get help from Oasis of Love Crisis Intervention Center, my prayer is that you get hope from somewhere. Visit vfmn.org, and there will be multiple resources, telephone numbers, and places for you to go to get help. Go to agapeoasis.com. We are community. We are the heart and the hands of Christ to help those in need, to be empowered, to be healed, to be restored, and to be strengthened. We have your back, no matter what. Forgive yourself and forgive others. We can help you do that. It starts with you.
That's great.
I thought it was so good you said, you are worth it. Because when you're in an abusive situation, the perpetrator takes who you are.
They do.
Take your power, take your strength, take your ability. You're no one except what he says you are. And then by you saying that, not only did you break out, but you said, you know what? I'm worth this. I'm worth being healed. I'm worth being delivered. And my children are worth it. I am somebody, and I do have purpose.
You know, there was a time we sat with our pastor more than once. I was going to law school, actually, and I was still working. And my then husband told my pastor, well, she just needs to quit her job. She won't be able to get her hair done every week and her nails done every week, but I'll support her to go. And he did. He paid for me to go to school. I actually earned my degree through him paying for my education. However, I knew if I stopped working, I would be destitute. Right after my pastor walked out in our counseling session, he looked at me and he said, I don't care what the pastor said. I'm going to do what I do. And that was it. So I never went to law school because I could not afford not to work. I couldn't afford not to.
There's a second part to this story that really talks about how God has restored you all's relationship, right? Because I think that's an important piece of it is there's a healing process that you had to go through. There's a healing process that had to happen with your children, right? And them receiving help as well. And then there's a healing process that had to happen with you all.
Correct.
And so we're going to save that for part 2 because I think it's so important to share that part that, you know, though it happened in the church, the restoration piece, right? There's a process of identity. There's a process of recognizing that this is what's going on. There's an entire process that walks through a healing journey. And we want to hear that piece as well. But as we're wrapping up, we really want to thank you so much for sharing your story, for giving those words of hope, but also for doing the work. Because you have touched so many lives. You have an amazing team that works with you, but you also have a vision to continue doing what you do and doing it well. So thank you so much. We can just give her a round of applause.
I want to share one last thing.
Absolutely. Say that again on the microphone.
I want to share one last thing. I realize that as I do this work, we have experiences, we gain wisdom, we have education, and we have knowledge. But what I also learn is there are humans, all of us are human. And with all these things that we have, the knowledge, the education, the wisdom, the experience, we also have to put in the work with those things to bring forth the healing, to bring forth the new. Because if we stay with just that information and we don't do anything with it, we're not exercising what we're learning. We're not putting into practice those healing steps. Because it matters not to know it and not apply it.
That's true.
It's like the word. You can know it well, but if you do not apply it, it will not reverberate in your heart and it will not take place in your life. So it doesn't matter how smart you are. It doesn't matter how gifted, how talented you are. If you don't use the tools that God gives you, no matter how he gives them to you or through whom he gives them to you, if you don't utilize them and apply them, they'll never help you.
That's true.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that. You know, if you were blessed by that message, if you feel like that's you, we really want to encourage you right now. There are so many resources, whether you are here in Minnesota, whether you're in Chicago, California, wherever you are, even if you reach out to us, we can actually connect you with people in your local area. But no, there is a plan for you. And your plan is good. We don't want you to ever forget that. And we're asking that you continue to join us with us in amplifying the voice to break the silence of violence.
Exactly.